Hey everyone, my name is Alex Miller, and I'm a PR manager at a Seattle tech startup called Ventus Labs. Right now, I'm sitting in my car on the edge of my grandmother's driveway, heart pounding so hard I can almost taste it in my mouth. It's just past twilight, the kind of blue-gray sky you get here by the Puget Sound in early July right after a soft drizzle. Tonight was supposed to be my big moment, a promotion announcement dinner, where half my team would be there congratulating me over salmon and champagne. But none of that matters anymore because tonight, my grandmother turned 75 and she baked her own cake, set a pink embroidered table for 10, lit every single candle herself, and waited. No one showed up. Not my mother, not my aunt, not my cousins, no one. And I only found out because I saw it on my Instagram feed, photos of them all dressed in white glasses raised against the backdrop of endless blue water cruising in Alaska. A luxury cruise she paid for them as a family reunion. The cruelest part isn't that they canceled. It's that they lied and she didn't deserve that. I remember the moment I read the text. I was at my desk halfway through drafting a press release for our next product launch when my phone buzzed with one line, "Plans changed. Don't bother coming." I stared at my screen 4:27 p.m. on a Wednesday. I reread it 3 times before I understood. My hand hovered over a small gift box I'd wrapped earlier that morning, a delicate silver locket I'd ordered from Etsy, engraved with 75 on the back, and a tiny music note inside that when you open it plays a lullaby Grandma used to hum to me as a kid. That music box little detail mattered more than any promotion. My chest tightened. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. Typical. She always hated conflict. So I sat there hearing my own heart echo in the silent office, wondering how anyone could treat her like this. When I finally saw the cruise photos posted just an hour earlier by my cousins, with captions like, "Family time is precious," and "Making memories in Alaska," something inside me snapped. The cheap lunches I'd eaten at my desk practicing for my speech tonight, the kudos from my boss, it all felt meaningless compared to the image of Grandma sitting alone by her candles back in Seattle. I tore up the RSVP note taped to my promo invite, grabbed my keys, and didn't look back. Rain slicked the windshield as I merged onto I-5 North, the highway lights stretching into the mist. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, but my mind was clear. She didn't deserve to sit there alone, waiting for ghosts. I called my friend Maria Lopez, my neighbor, who's been like a second grandmother to her on the way. No answer. But that was okay. I knew where I was going. By the time I pulled into Grandma's quiet cul-de-sac, the street lamps were flickering on. Everywhere else, porch lights blinked, welcome. Hers stayed dark. I killed the engine, climbed out, and for a moment, hesitated. What if I was too late? The angle of the street made her house look smaller somehow, like it had shrunk from loneliness. I crossed the wet grass and stepped onto the front walkway. My heels clicked too loud against the concrete. I hated the sound. It felt like betraying the silence she'd been living in all day. I cleared my throat, then knocked softly on the door. No answer. My heart nodded. I reached out, turned the knob. It wasn't locked. I pushed inside. The first thing I saw was that old wooden music box on the console by the entry, the one I'd given her when I was 10, still wound up, the lid cracked, but the brass inlay of "To Alex, with love" still glimmering. And then I saw her through the doorway into the kitchen, small, hunched, her silver hair haloed by the candlelight. The cake sat in the center of the table, candles still burning down into waxy pools, pink embroidered napkins folded neatly beside empty plates. No one spoke. The tick of the antique clock on the wall echoed each second, a reminder of every year she'd spent loving us. I swallowed hard, stepping into the room. She looked up at me, eyes glistening. "Alex," she whispered, voice cracking like the rain against the window. I wanted to run to her, hug her tight, tell her I was sorry I'd been late. But I hadn't lost a track of time she had. Her silence cut deeper than any excuse. I pulled out the matching music box from my coat pocket, winded it, and set it on the table beside the cake. The first notes of her lullaby floated through the room, and her hands trembled as she reached for it. In that instant, I knew this night wasn't just about a forgotten birthday. It was about reclaiming every promise she thought our family had broken. But I also knew there was more to uncover. As the last candle guttered out and the music box fell silent, she placed her frail hand over mine, and I saw in her eyes a question. "What will you do now, my dear?" And that's when it hit me. There's no going back. Not anymore. I stayed with Grandma until the music box wound itself to silence, its tiny lullaby notes hanging in the air like a promise. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy with clouds, as though the world itself didn't quite know what to make of what had just happened. I helped Grandma clear away the cake. Her hands shook so badly I thought she might drop the plate. Then I tucked her into her favorite recliner, the one with the faded floral upholstery that smelled like lavender sachets and mothballs. She closed her eyes exhausted, but I could tell she was still thinking of something else. So was I. By the time I left her house, it was nearly midnight. I didn't lock the door behind me. I didn't turn off the kitchen light. I just pulled on my rain jacket, slipped out the side door, and climbed into my car. The engine sprang to life, and I sat there for a long moment listening to the hum of the heater as it tried to clear my windshield. I thought about the will. Grandpa's will, the codicil that Grandma had tucked away and almost forgotten about. Signed in his precise handwriting, all property to Victoria. If Victoria is unable or unwilling, then to Alex. My name. It should have been a comfort, but instead it felt like a loaded gun in my hand. I punched the steering wheel once hard. The car rocked against the driveway. My breath caught. I was angry at my mother for cutting Grandma out at Victoria, for going along with it, at myself for waiting so long to realize I could actually do something. But most of all, I was terrified. Because inheriting a house, a bank account, a handful of rental properties was not the same as claiming guardianship over a 75-year-old woman with creaky bones and a stubborn heart. There were forms to file court dates to show up to, and people to convince strangers in robes who wouldn't know Grandma from any other frail old woman in America. And worst of all, there was my mother. I sat up straight and dialed the only person I could think of, Daniel Kim. He was an attorney at a small civil rights firm in Capitol Hill, the kind of lawyer who cared about the little guy, about people who'd been railroaded by big money or family lies. I met him once at a community forum on elder justice. He'd given a speech so passionate a woman in the front row had cried. I still remember Daniel shaking hands with Grandma afterward, introducing himself, telling her, "Your story matters." That was enough trust for me. His voicemail picked up. "Hey, Alex, it's Dan. Sorry I can't come to the phone right now. Leave me a message." I hesitated. "Dan, it's Alex. I need your help. It's about Grandma. Call me back as soon as you can." I hung up before I lost my nerve. The next morning's rain was gone, and the air smelled like wet pavement and new beginnings. I drove to my usual coffee spot, Stumptown, on Capitol Hill, and parked in the lot behind the shop. Through the windows, I could see baristas in flannel shirts pulling espresso shots, the usual crowd of tech bros tapping away on MacBooks. I felt out of place, but I needed a caffeine jolt more than ever. I ordered a double Americano and a croissant, then found a corner table. My hands still trembled as I pulled out my phone to check for messages. Nothing from Dan, nothing from Maria. My inbox was empty except for a notification from Grandma's bank, unusual account activity detected. My heart lurched. I tapped the message. It said someone had accessed her safety deposit box early that morning. Someone had removed documents. Which documents? Why, I slammed my phone down and it slid across the table. A few heads looked up at me, but I tried to look calm as I retrieved it, my coffee growing cold. I realized two things at once. First, whoever stole those documents might know about Grandpa's will. Second, Grandma's house wouldn't be entirely safe unless I did something now. I texted Maria. "Can you come by Grandma's today? We need to check on her." Then I headed back out into the humid morning. As I drove back down I-5, I rehearsed what I'd say to Dan. They took her paperwork. They're trying to lock me out. But I also knew I'd have to answer the big question, why didn't I do anything sooner? My promotion dinner had felt important. My career felt like my own success story. But this protecting Grandma felt like the only thing I knew mattered. I parked in Grandma's driveway again, hesitated, and then quietly opened the side door. The house was silent. I crept through the living room where the music box still sat open on the floor, its brass inlay tarnished but beautiful in the light. My fingers found the edge of the box, and I lifted it, hearing a soft thunk as the latch caught on the carpet. Inside, among old family photos and a handful of dusty postcards, was a small envelope stamped King County Records. I held it up and shook it. No sound. I opened it and pulled out what looked like a certified copy of the will and codicil. Dated 2 days ago. But who had requested it, and where was the original? I slipped the papers into my jacket pocket. A sudden noise made me jump. The front door creaked open and I heard Grandma's slow shuffle. "Alex," she called. I swallowed, heart racing. "Grandma, it's me. I found something." She appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a quilt, eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Her voice was small but steady, more steady than mine felt. I held out the envelope. "Someone went to the county records office. They got a copy of the will. Look, Grandma, you're listed as co-owner, but your signature's not on the guardianship papers. You were never asked to sign over anything official." Her eyebrows rose. "I thought I did." She bit her lip. "I remember signing something." That doubt in her voice was the hinge on which I'd swing the entire case. "You were tricked," I said softly. I reached out, wiping a tear that rolled down her cheek. "They told you it was just tax stuff paperwork, but it was guardianship. They lied." She looked at me, eyes wide, memory flickering. "Is that why they're at that cruise? Because they didn't want you in control?" I nodded. "They wanted the house, Grandma. They wanted your money." She closed her eyes and shook her head as if the words hurt to hear. "Oh, my poor girl," she whispered, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry I let them." I swallowed. "It's not your fault. You did what they asked, but I couldn't stop the anger rising in me. Anger at them for using her age and trust against her anger at myself for letting it happen." I helped her back to the chair and sat down beside her. She picked at the quilt on her lap, tracing the patterns stitched decades ago. Outside, the sun peeked through the curtains, painting the hardwood floor in stripes of light and shadow. That play of light felt symbolic hope and doubt side by side. I looked at her and made a decision. "Grandma, I'm going to fight this. I'm going to take legal guardianship so no one can ever do this again." She lifted her head and met my gaze. "Do you think I can handle court, Alex?" Her voice was trembling. I took her hand. "I'll handle the court. You just rest." She gave me the smallest smile, but it was enough. I called Dan as soon as I got home. This time he answered. I told him everything, the cruise photos, the missing documents, the envelope from King County, the lies. He listened in silence, then said, "You've got a strong case for emergency guardianship and undue influence. But we need more. We need proof they manipulated her bank records, witness statements, anything." I swallowed. "I can get that." He paused. "Be careful, Alex. They'll fight back hard." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I know." And I hung up. Next, I reached for my laptop and pulled up the email from the bank. Logs of account access. I printed the statement showing the safety deposit box was opened without Grandma present. Then I drafted an email to Maria. "Please bring your camera and recorder. We need your statement on video what you saw when you checked on Grandma after lunch, and that you never saw any paperwork from Vera." I hit send, heart pounding. Social media notifications buzzed on my phone, comments from the family group chat. My brother Ethan had posted a selfie from the ship. "Wish Grandma could see the glaciers." People had liked it. I felt bile rise in my throat. I typed a reply. "Stop lying. You left her alone." Then deleted it. I didn't want to feed the beast. I just wanted to prepare my case. All day I worked, I requested DMV photos to confirm who signed the guardianship form. I called the cruise company's legal department to see if any paperwork had gone through Grandma's name. I scoured old birthday cards on Grandma's mantle for any hint of intent moments she'd written about finances or family promises. Each piece of evidence felt like a flashlight beam into the dark corners of their deception. But with every new fact, the weight of responsibility pressed down on me. If I missed something, if I filed incorrectly, if I hesitated, Grandma could be stuck in a nursing home instead of her own home while Vera walked away with the deed. That evening, as the sky turned to indigo, I sat on Grandma's porch, swinging the envelope of documents on my lap. The old porch lights cast long shadows across the boards. I rocked back and forth, my phone buzzing with a text from an unknown number. "Your mom wants to talk. Call now." I closed my eyes. I knew it was Vera. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of hearing my voice. I stood up, clutching the envelope, looked back at the house where Grandma's silhouette flickered behind the curtains, then walked to the wooden fence, leaning my forehead against the cool slats. The fence separated our yard from the neighbors, but it couldn't stop the noise of my own fear, the fear that I might lose everything if I made a wrong move. I took a deep breath, wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans, then sent a quick text to Dan. "Ready to file? Let me know when and where." My phone buzzed almost instantly. "Meet me tomorrow at 9 a.m. at my office. Bring everything." I stared at that message as the porch light blinked off and on the swing, gently creaking in the breeze. The envelope in my hand felt heavier than ever. Tomorrow, I thought, tomorrow I commit to this fight. But tonight, all I could do was stand there, caught between dread and determination, wondering if standing up for Grandma would cost me more than I ever imagined. Until the text notification lit up my screen one more time. "Your hearing date is set for next week. Be prepared." I didn't know how I'd find the strength for that. Not yet. I woke up Thursday morning with my chest tight, like someone had wrapped a steel band around it overnight. The hearing was in 2 days, and I still had so much to do. I poured my usual black coffee in Grandma's chipped china cup, her favorite, and stared at the steam curling up to the ceiling. Grandma sat across the table, eyes sleepy but alert, fingering the quilt I'd brought over yesterday. I felt the weight of her trust pressing down on me. Every choice I made now could secure her safety or hand her back to Victoria's lies. I drove to Daniel's office in Capitol Hill, the streets slick from a late drizzle, and parked in the alley behind a row of brick storefronts. As I locked the car, my phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "I'll be there at noon. Got my camera and recorder." Relief chased the anxiety out of me just for a second. Maria had lived next door to Grandma for 10 years. She was our unwritten genealogist with her front yard tomato plants and a heart big enough to embrace any old lady's stories. If Maria testified under oath about never seeing any guardianship paperwork or pressure on Grandma, that'd be gold in court. Inside Daniel's office smelled of lemon oil and old law books. He'd pulled out a long conference table and spread evidence across it. The certified will copy, my printed bank logs, a stack of neighbor statements, and a small flash drive labeled Audio. Grandma. My stomach dropped. He'd recovered the recording I didn't even know existed. "This, Alex," he said, sliding the drive toward me, "is the game changer." I picked it up with shaking fingers and slid it into my jacket pocket. "What is it?" I asked. He looked at me. "Grandma recorded a conversation last year when Victoria convinced her to sign tax papers. She says, 'I don't understand this, honey, but if it'll help you, I trust you.' Then Victoria laughs, 'Just a formality,' and calls her confused old bat." My blood turned to ice. I'd always suspected manipulation, but hearing their voices, Grandma's tremble, Victoria's sneer, made it real. "We'll submit this at the hearing as evidence of undue influence," Daniel said, eyes serious. But be warned, Victoria's team will call it a breach of privacy. I nodded. I'll take that risk. Back at Grandma's, I mapped out the next move, a candlelight vigil on her front porch tonight. I envisioned neighbors with their own candles lining the walkway, the soft glow reminding everyone that truth couldn't be snuffed out. I posted event details on a local community board. Join us to stand with Grandma Sheridan. 2 p.m. tonight, 412 Alder Street. Bring candles. Instantly, reactions poured in, some supportive, some accusing me of publicly shaming the family. But mostly messages of solidarity. We'll be there. Like you said, family who shows up matters. Even a note from Ethan, my brother. I'm sorry. Wish I'd listened sooner. I'll be there. As twilight arrived, Grandma settled into her rocker on the porch, wrapped in a shawl that smelled like lavender and mothballs. I handed her a warm tea in a to-go mug. The neighbors lined up on the sidewalk, Mrs. Levin, Mr. Haskins, the Petersons, even a few of the church ladies who always brought casseroles. Maria set up her tripod at the end of the driveway, ready to record witness statements. I grabbed a single white candle, lit it, and felt the flame quiver in the evening breeze. Symbolically, it was the same kind of fragile spark Grandma protected her whole life. One by one, neighbors stepped forward to light their candles from mine, murmuring words like, "We're here for you and no one deserves to be alone." Then the unexpected happened. Halfway through the vigil, a black SUV rolled down the street, headlights pausing at the curb. Victoria stepped out, heels clicking on wet pavement, a smirk fixed on her face. She hadn't RSVP'd, she hadn't called. Yet there she was, hands on hips, umbrella dripping. A hush fell. I felt Grandma stiffen beside me. Victoria raised one manicured brow, then flicked open her phone's camera. "How quaint," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "A candle vigil for self-pity." The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. I stepped forward, heart pounding so hard I feared I'd inhale it. "This isn't self-pity, Victoria," I said, voice steady. "It's solidarity. People care." She laughed, a brittle sound that cracked the warm night air. "People care about a good show," she replied. "But the judge cares about paperwork, and I have signed forms proving Grandma's incompetence." With that, she stalked off into the shadows. My throat closed up. Her words were meant to wound, to twist public sympathy back to her side. Grandma wrapped her arms around herself. I knelt beside her and placed my hand over hers, feeling her tremble. "It's okay, Grandma," I whispered. "We have the recordings, the records, the neighbors. We're ready." Her eyes flicked to mine, doubt warring with trust. In that look, I saw the betrayal she'd felt, and I swore under my breath to win this for her, for me, for every person who'd ever been cast aside. The next morning, I reviewed my checklist, filed emergency guardianship petition witness affidavits, the audio transcript, bank records, neighbor statements, and the vigil video Maria had captured. I printed copies too many to count and arranged them into neat folders. Each folder weighed a few pounds in my arms, but I carried them upstairs to Grandma's kitchen table like a parade of proof ready for battle. She hovered in the doorway, watching me, eyes wide. "Alex, you're doing too much," she said. I shook my head. "Not enough," I replied. "They stole from you. They stole from me. We're taking it back." That afternoon, I drafted my opening statement on a legal pad. I wrote in all caps, "The court must protect the elderly from exploitation." Grandma Sheridan was manipulated and denied her rights. The act of writing it by hand felt old-fashioned but powerful, like carving truth into stone. I read the words aloud, voice echoing in the empty living room. Grandma sat in her rocker, knitting needles, clicking her small face stern. It was the first time I saw pride flicker in her blue eyes. But beneath that pride lay fear, and behind that fear was the knowledge that a courtroom was cold, impersonal, and often cruel. Late that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch swing with my phone in hand, scrolling through comments on the community's Facebook page. Some were kind. Glad to see people standing up for Mrs. Sheridan. Others were venomous. Why can't families just forgive and forget? My finger hovered over like and reply, but I closed the app instead. Social media was a battlefield of opinions. The real fight would happen under fluorescent courtroom lights. I glanced at the old music box on the table inside its brass inlay, dull in the low moonlight. I wound it once, and the tune Grandma's Lullaby played softly, a reminder that beneath all the legal jargon, this was a story of love, betrayal, and memory. At sunrise, I got a call from the courthouse clerk. Your hearing is set for Tuesday at 9 a.m. Department 3, Judge Ramirez. I thanked her and hung up, breath-catching. 2 days, 2 mornings and nights of worry. I looked back at Grandma stirring sleepily beneath her quilt. I touched her fuzzy gray hair. We've got this, I told her, though my voice wavered. She looked at me, confusion clouding her features. Are we going to court? She asked. I nodded and smoothed her blanket. Yes, Grandma. We're going to stand up for you. The hours until Tuesday bled together. I met with Daniel to finalize exhibits, practiced cross-examination questions, and even rehearsed calming Grandma's nerves. I set out our clothes, my navy suit, her soft wool cardigan. I packed extra copies of everything into a leather satchel. Yet no matter how many preparations I made, a knot of dread sat in my stomach. What if the judge believed Victoria? What if the recording got thrown out? What if Grandma froze on the stand? That night, I didn't use the music box. Instead, I lit a single candle on Grandma's kitchen table and left it burning as I lay beside her in the guest room. The flame danced in the dark, swaying like a heartbeat. In the quiet, I whispered to the shadows, I won't let you or anyone take her life away. The candle sputtered, and as it did, I imagined flames spreading bright and unstoppable, burning away doubt and cruelty until only truth remained. Then it went out, plunging me into darkness. I closed my eyes, waiting for sleep, but all I could hear was the echo of that tiny spark dying, and a promise that tomorrow we'd fight to keep it alive. I woke Tuesday morning, before my alarm, my chest already tight with anticipation and dread. The sky outside Grandma's window was that pale, uncertain Seattle gray I'd known all my life, the kind that makes you feel both comforted and weighed down at the same time. I dressed carefully. Navy suit, crisp white shirt, smiling at myself in the mirror as I adjusted my tie, trying to find confidence in the reflection. Grandma shuffled into the hallway in her soft wool cardigan slippers, slipping a little on the hardwood floor. She stopped and looked at me, confusion and pride flickering behind her deep blue eyes. Are you ready? I asked, forcing my voice steady. She nodded, though I could tell she wasn't quite sure what she was ready for. I took her hand and guided her downstairs every step, reminding me how much risk we were taking, our reputations, her dignity, my career, all riding on, convincing a stranger in a robe that they belonged together, that they had been torn apart by lies. The drive to the King County Courthouse in downtown Seattle was unnervingly silent. I kept glancing at Grandma in the passenger seat, her quilted purse on her lap, her hand gripping the door handle, her gaze fixed on the glassy skyscrapers beyond. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I flicked the radio on and off, trying to fill the silence, then turned it off again, the hum of the engine suddenly unbearable. We parked on 4th Avenue, where the streets were already busy with mid-morning traffic, pedestrians in slickers, scurrying under umbrellas, coffee in hand business as usual. Everyone oblivious to the small drama unfolding in Courthouse Room 314 that would decide whether Grandma would keep her home or be handed over to people who saw her as a resource, not a person. Inside the courthouse smelled of polished wood and institutional bleach. We passed the security scanner, Grandma's walker beeped obnoxiously, then climbed the terrazzo stairs to the 3rd floor. The hall was a narrow corridor lined with closed doors. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I could hear muffled voices through the door marked Dept. 3, Judge Ramirez. My stomach clenched. I turned to Grandma. We're here, I said softly. She nodded slowly, her eyes darting around like a child lost in a store. I squeezed her hand, gave her a small smile, then took a deep breath and opened the door. The courtroom was a rectangular room with tall windows letting in that pale Seattle light, rows of wooden benches on one side, a raised bench for the judge at the front, and 2 tables facing it, ours on the left, Victoria's on the right. I spotted Victoria immediately. She was flawless in a charcoal gray pantsuit, hair pulled back tight, red lipstick like a sharpened blade. Beside her sat her attorney, a portly man with perfect posture and a file of papers that looked 7 inches thick. Beside me, Maria Lopez set up her iPhone on a small tripod ready to record witness statements. I motioned for Grandma to sit down. She took the chair as if it were a throne she'd never known she'd reclaim. Judge Ramirez entered quietly, robe rustling, and took his seat. He glanced at his notes and then at me. "Ms. Miller," he began. Voice calm. "We are here today on an emergency guardianship petition filed by your sister, Ms. Victoria Miller, and counter-petitioned by you, Ms. Miller. Counsel, are you ready to proceed?" My heart hammered so loud I thought he'd hear it. Daniel Kim stood and said, "Ready, Your Honor." On the other side, Victoria's attorney stood and said the same. The judge nodded and called petitioner's counsel, "You may open." Daniel turned to me, eyes warm with solidarity, then faced the bench. He spoke without notes, opening like a seasoned advocate. "Your Honor, what we have here is a clear case of undue influence and elder exploitation. Mrs. Sheridan, age 75, was manipulated by her daughter into signing guardianship papers under false pretenses, resulting in complete loss of autonomy and property rights. We intend to prove that these actions violated Washington state statutes on undue influence, and we will present witness testimony, audio evidence, and documentary proof to support our case." His voice was firm, measured, and I felt a swell of pride. I glanced at Grandma. Her eyes were closed, head tilted back against the leather chair, as if she were listening to every word in her sleep. Then Victoria's attorney rose. He spoke in a silky, measured tone. "Your Honor, despite my learned friend's theatrics, the facts are clear. Mrs. Sheridan exhibited diminished capacity. My client attempted to protect her mother's best interests, securing her estate and well-being. All documents were signed voluntarily, and any suggestion otherwise is defamatory. We will show medical records indicating cognitive decline and expert testimony affirming these measures were necessary." He sat with a polite nod, then turned to Victoria, whispered something, and she offered the judge a serene, confident smile. The judge nodded. "We will hear evidence." He called the first witness, Maria Lopez. She stood and took a seat before the bench. Daniel handed her a copy of her signed affidavit and asked her to confirm it. Maria's voice was steady as she recounted how she'd checked on Grandma at lunchtime and found no paperwork on the kitchen table, heard no mention of guardianship forms, and certainly no suggestion of legal tax papers. Daniel then played a short clip of Maria's recorded statement on his phone, her voice echoing in the courtroom. "I never saw any documents. She was confused, but she never asked me to sign anything." Victoria's attorney objected hearsay, he said, but the judge overruled him, deciding he'd rule later on admissibility. Maria's testimony earned a few murmurs of approval from the courtroom gallery neighbors who'd come to show support, and I could feel Grandma's fingers loosen around her purse strap. Next, Daniel called me as a witness. I stood hard in my throat and made my way to the stand. He asked me to recount the cruise photos I discovered the canceled dinner, and the moment I realized my family had deceived Grandma. I spoke plainly. I saw them celebrating without her. She paid for the trip. They called it a gift. But they lied. They left her sitting alone. My voice cracked on alone, and Victoria's attorney raised an eyebrow, but the judge allowed me to continue. I described finding the codicil tucked behind the original will, the part that named me as secondary heir, and how Grandma had said I thought I was signing tax forms. I could see the judge jotting notes as I spoke. When I finished, I returned to my seat, adrenaline coursing through me, my hands slick with sweat. then the biggest risk Daniel asked to play the secret recording from the flash drive. My throat went dry. He inserted the drive into his laptop, clicked play. The courtroom fell silent, except for the tinny voice of Grandma saying, "I don't understand these papers, honey, but if it helps you, I trust you." Then a harsh laugh. Victoria's voice, "Just sign it, Mom. It's all just paperwork." I watched Grandma's face pale as the voices filled the room. Even Victoria's attorney jumped slightly. When it ended, Daniel moved to admit it into evidence. Victoria's lawyer jumped up shouting that it was illegally recorded, prejudicial, a breach of privacy. The judge held up a hand. "I will consider objections later. Next counsel for the defense may cross-examine the witness." My pulse raced. You never know if the judge will allow such damning evidence. The gavel hadn't fallen yet. Victoria rose, calm and poised. She approached the bench and said, "Your Honor, if I may." The judge nodded. She turned to Daniel. "Mr. Kim, this recording was made without my client's knowledge or consent in her private home. It violates RCW 9.73. We ask you to strike it and all references." Daniel countered. "Your Honor, RCW 973 allows recordings if one party consents. The statute is Washington's one-party consent law." Mrs. Sheridan, whose voice is on the recording, consented by continuing the call. "Moreover, this recording is critical evidence of undue influence." The judge frowned, brows knit, then nodded. "I will allow it provisionally. Final ruling will come with the written order." My knees felt unsteady, but I straightened up, relief and renewed determination washing over me. Victoria then called her first witness, Dr. Patel, a geriatric psychiatrist. He testified Grandma had mild cognitive impairment, needed assistance with bills, and was at risk of financial exploitation. Daniel cross-examined him gently, asking if Dr. Patel had reviewed the audio evidence or met Grandma alone. The doctor admitted he had only a file and no personal interviews. Daniel gently unraveled the testimony. "So the doctor based his opinion solely on secondhand records?" The doctor admitted yes. That admission undercut the defense's narrative. Grandma's decline wasn't firsthand assessed, she'd never been properly evaluated, and the timing of that evaluation coincided precisely with when Victoria filed for guardianship. The judge jotted furiously. By midday, the defense rested. Daniel approached the bench for closing argument. I rose to stand beside him, heart pounding so loudly I thought the judge might hear it. Daniel spoke passionately. "This case is about protecting our elders from unscrupulous actors who exploit their vulnerability. We've shown audio proof of manipulation, witness testimony of absent paperwork, and a codicil placing Alex as the rightful heir. We ask this court to grant emergency guardianship to Alex Miller, who has demonstrated both the willingness and the moral imperative to safeguard Mrs. Sheridan's well-being." He turned to look at Grandma sitting stoically, but trembling slightly, then back to the judge. "Your Honor, no one should fear their own family." Victoria's attorney gave his closing a conventional plea about due process and protecting the vulnerable. But by then, the courtroom felt irrevocably shifted. I sank back into my chair, adrenaline still coursing through every vein. Judge Ramirez leaned forward and said, "I will take your arguments under advisement. A written ruling will follow in 2 days." The gavel landed with a hollow thud. The hearing was over. Immediately, we were swarmed by reporters from the local TV stations, their cameras flickering like fireflies. Maria offered statements on camera. We stood for Mrs. Sheridan because she deserved to be heard. I tried to answer questions, but my throat felt raw. Grandma's hand found mine under the table, her grip both fragile and fierce. As we left the courtroom, Victoria hovered at the door, her eyes locked on mine. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but the reporters surged between us, pressing microphones. I saw her lips form words, "Lawyers will see you," but the crowd swallowed her voice. Outside, the sun dipped behind clouds, casting the courthouse steps in shadow. Neighbors who'd come early were waiting Mrs. Levin, Mr. Haskins holding takeout coffee in paper cups. They surrounded us, offering smiles and pats on the back. Ethan appeared, cheeks flushed, and gave me a hesitant hug. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. I looked for Grandma and saw her leaning on Maria's arm, shaky but determined. We formed a little human chain of solidarity. Family I chose, community I rediscovered. But as we walked down 4th Avenue toward the parking garage, I felt a cold hand of uncertainty close around my heart. The protective seal wasn't in place yet. The judge's written ruling could go either way. Victoria's threat hovered in the air. Her mouth had opened. Her words would come dripping with venom in the next 48 hours. My phone buzzed, one new message from an unknown number. "Be careful what you wish for." I slid the phone into my pocket without reading it. I glanced at Grandma. Her shoulders were stiff, her face guarded. She caught my eye and gave a tiny nod as if to say, "You did well." But the fight wasn't over. That night, back at Grandma's, we tried to return to normal. I heated up leftovers, we watched a rerun of Jeopardy, and I tucked her into bed. She fell asleep to the hum of the furnace, the quilt tucked tight under her chin. I wound the music box once and set it on her nightstand. It played the lullaby softly, the same melody that had anchored us through every storm. I closed the door and sat in the dark hallway, the echo of those notes lingering in my ears. My phone lay on the floor beside me, screen dark. I wanted to sleep, but I couldn't. I thought of Victoria's warning, the pending court order, the neighbors counting on me, and Grandma's fragile trust. My resolve burned like a quiet flame in the dark. Tomorrow, I'd open that envelope from Judge Ramirez and finally know whether our stand had saved Grandma or set us on a path to something far worse. The lullaby played on, and I realized that in 2 days everything would change, and I didn't know if I was ready for what came next. I woke early that Thursday, the envelope from Judge Ramirez lying on the kitchen table like a sleeping animal. I wasn't quite sure how to approach. Grandma was still asleep in her recliner quilt pulled up to her chin, and the morning light was just beginning to filter through the curtains in pale slashes. My heart thumped as I tore open the envelope, unfolding his typed ruling with shaking fingers. The judge had granted my emergency guardianship petition. Grandma's residence, personal care, and financial decisions were now legally my responsibility. Relief flooded me, but it came with an asterisk. He'd denied my request to transfer the property deeds immediately, ordering a full evidentiary hearing on the estate's distribution in 60 days. In his words, the court finds sufficient concern regarding undue influence, but requires additional documentary proof before altering testamentary provisions. 60 days. 2 months of bureaucratic limbo. 2 months in which Victoria could continue to manipulate to drain accounts to undermine Grandma. I sank into the nearest chair, head spinning. It wasn't the victory I'd risked so much for. I folded the ruling and tucked it into my jacket pocket, then made coffee so strong it trembled in the mug. Grandma shuffled into the kitchen in her slippered feet, yawning and rubbing her eyes. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, voice rough with sleep. I knelt beside her. The judge ruled Grandma. "We got guardianship." Her eyes lit with relief, but then I watched them narrow. "But he wants more proof before we fix the will. They'll keep it in his chambers until the hearing. 60 days. She exhaled, a small tremor in her shoulders. "I thought once I gave you the papers you'd—" she started. I shook my head. "They still have the originals upstairs, remember?" "We only have the copies." She blinked, as if remembering something lost. I took her hand. "It's okay. We'll find the originals. We'll get you what's yours." She nodded, but I could see the worry flicker behind her trust. The risk of a second hearing meant I needed to shore up evidence fast. First, I called the county archives. The clerk told me the original will and codicil had been microfilmed in 2002 when my grandfather died. The microfilm was stored off-site, accessible only by appointment and only on weekdays. Friday morning at 9. I booked it immediately. At least I'd have the official record. But I also knew microfilm copies aren't legal proof of originals in court. They just verified authenticity. To truly force the judge to reconvey the deeds, I'd need the physical document itself, which meant getting into the courthouse vault. Security there was tight, only the county clerk and a handful of staff had keys. But if I could find evidence that someone Victoria had tampered with the original after signing, I could expose it as invalid. It was a long shot. It was a risk. But it was the only shot I had. That afternoon, I drove Grandma to her weekly checkup at Harborview Medical Center. She clasped her little purse to her chest like a lifeline. "I feel like I'm stealing my own life," she said quietly as I backed out of the driveway. I glanced at her, surprised by her honesty. "You're protecting your life," I said, forcing calm. "You earned every bit of it." At the hospital, she shuffled along the sterile corridors, the smell of antiseptic making me queasy. The nurse took vitals and chatted politely, but when I asked for a summary of any cognitive tests, the nurse looked uncomfortable. "It's just routine," she said, handing me a bland printout. "Your grandmother scored just below normal for her age, but that's common." I put the paper in my bag. "I'll see you in a bit," I told Grandma. She sat in the waiting area, staring at the wall. I hovered, wishing I could shield her from this condescending assessment. Then I remembered Dr. Patel's testimony. He based his conclusions on those very records, which might actually work in our favor if I could show they were incomplete or outdated. I snapped a picture of the printout with my phone. Every scrap of paper was a clue. On the drive home, I made calls to the local newspaper, the Seattle Times, to see if a reporter would cover the plight of elderly residents exploited by family. The assignment desk put me off. "We already did a piece last year," but I persisted. "This is different. It's a first-person story about a 75-year-old woman who paid for her own cruise and got abandoned, then nearly lost her home." Finally, an intern agreed to meet me for coffee the next morning. I hung up, heart thrumming. Media attention could pressure Victoria and the court, but it could also turn into a circus. Still, community awareness was a powerful symbol, like the vigil candles flickering defiantly in the night. That evening, the neighbors gathered again, this time in my living room. I'd sent out personalized invitations: Maria Lopez, Mrs. Levin, Mr. Haskins, even two of the church ladies who brought casseroles. They sat in a semicircle, each holding a candle we'd lit to commemorate Grandma's perseverance. The coffee table was strewn with papers, the judge's ruling copies of bank logs, the hospital printout, and a map of the county archives. "We need to go get that microfilm," I told them, tracing the route on the map with my finger. "On Friday morning, I have an appointment, but I need a witness. I can't go alone." Maria volunteered immediately. "I'll be there. You wouldn't do it without me." I looked around at their faces, wrinkled, lined by life, but determined. "We'll go together," I said, "and I'm inviting anyone who cares about justice." They nodded, murmured agreements. The candles created dancing shadows on the walls, the flames' reflection in their eyes like a gathering of silent allies. Later that night, I sat on Grandma's porch swing, the envelope of the judge's ruling tucked in my jacket. The old music box sat on the windowsill, its brass inlay catching the street lamp glow. I wound it once and let it play the tinkling lullaby, breaking the night's hush. The melody felt like an emblem of Grandma's resilience, fragile but unbroken. I scribbled notes in my legal pad: microfilm, hospital records, media contact, vault plan. I felt the weight of each item as though I were packing for battle. A text from Ethan popped up. "I'll help at the archives. Meet you there." My chest loosened. Even he was coming around. But right then, my phone buzzed again, an unknown number. I swiped to read. "You're making a big mistake. Stop now or regret it." No signature. I stared at the screen in the dark, the music box's melody warbling into silence. Threats from nowhere meant one thing. Victoria's fight wasn't just in court. It was going to be personal. The next morning was gray, with mist clinging to the roads. I picked up Grandma's quilt from where she'd left it on her chair, draped it over my shoulders like armor, and woke her with a soft knock. Time to show the county we mean business, I whispered. She sat up, confusion and resolve mixing in her eyes. I gave her a reassuring smile. Today we get your story on record. We drove past the ferry terminal, past downtown's glass towers, to the archives building, a squat brick structure half buried behind trees. Maria was waiting at the front steps, camera bag slung over her shoulder. She greeted us with a nod, no fuss, just solidarity. Inside, the clerk ushered us into a dimly lit room lined with metal cabinets. He wheeled out a microfilm reader and slid a reel marked Sheridan Herald, 2002. The air smelled of dust and machine oil. Maria clicked on her recorder, capturing ambient noise and the clerk's voice. I held Grandma's hand as the clerk loaded the reel. The screen flickered, and there it was, my grandfather's will, perfectly typed, followed by the codicil. I took notes on every detail, the ink's color, the signature's flourish, the paper's watermark. I snapped a photo with my phone, but I knew the judge would want certified copies. The clerk typed them up as photocopies stamped certified true copy with an embossed seal. We packed them carefully into a folder labeled evidence. We left the building feeling triumphant, but the threat text lingered in my mind like a shadow. We'd done the work, documented Grandma's intent, corroborated our story, but we still needed the originals to seal the deal. Back at Grandma's house, I tucked the certified copies into a safe deposit envelope, while Maria transferred her recordings and photos onto a flash drive. She looked up and said, "Now about the vault." I nodded. "Tomorrow night, when the building is closed, I need your help retrieving the original will from the clerk's office after hours." Maria's eyes widened. She was a witness, not a burglar. "I know it's risky," I said, "but if we don't get the originals, Victoria's team will keep dragging us through delays. We need to force their hand." She swallowed, then nodded. "I'm in." That night, we met under cover of darkness at the archives. I carried a small toolkit in my jacket pocket, lockpicks I'd borrowed from a friend who owed me a favor. Maria brought her phone with a mounted flashlight and her compact tripod. We slipped inside through the side door I'd reconnoitered earlier, the lock giving way with a click I'd rehearsed in my head 100 times. My hands shook as we crept through the empty hallway, sneakers whispering on the linoleum. At the clerk's office door, I knelt and used the picks. The pins fell one by one until the latch clicked. I exhaled, heart slamming in my ears, and swung the door open. Inside, the lights were off except for the faint glow of the parking lot beyond the window. The old wooden desk loomed, papers stacked carefully, the vault door at the back with its numeric keypad. I found the coded envelope labeled Sheridan 2002 Original Will and grabbed it. It was heavier than I expected. I shoved it into my coat. Then Maria found the smaller envelope marked Codicil. We paused, listening for sirens or footsteps, but the building was silent as a tomb. We turned to leave, and that's when the building alarm blared, some motion sensor we hadn't located. Fluorescent lights flicked on red strobes flashing. My breath froze. "Move," I whispered, grabbing Maria's arm and bolting for the door. She dropped her tripod but kept the flash drive clasped to her chest. We tore down the hallway, my coattails flapping past rows of locked cabinets and empty reading tables. The exit door loomed. I fired the lockpicks out of the pocket, spun the knob, and Johnson, the security guard, appeared behind me, flashlight beam in hand. He barked, "Hey, stop!" I pushed the door open and lunged outside into the misty parking lot, heart hammering so loud I thought it might ignite. Maria was right behind me. We sprinted to my car, hopped in, and the engine roared to life. As I peeled out, tires screeching, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Johnson was shouting into his radio, but his light couldn't keep up. We slammed the car into a side street and vanished into the night. In my lap, the weight of the two envelopes felt like lead, but as I looked at Maria's wide, exhilarated eyes, I felt a fierce surge of triumph. We had the originals. We had the will and codicil. Back at Grandma's, we laid the documents on the kitchen table. She stood over them, tears pooling in her eyes. "I can't believe you did this," she whispered. I knelt beside her and took her hand. "You deserve this, Grandma. No one else can tell your story." She looked at the envelopes, then at me, and the candle on the table flickered in the draft, sending her shadow dancing on the walls. It felt like a benediction. I called Daniel immediately. We did it. I have the originals. He was silent, then said, "Be careful. This could backfire if the court calls it theft." I took a deep breath, I know, but we needed them. He reminded me that our closing filings were due Monday and we could submit the originals under seal. My adrenaline spiked. "We'll be ready," as I hung up my phone buzzed with one more unknown text. Nice try, but justice comes at a price. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The echoes of that alarm, the clack of the vault door, the flicker of the candle, they all swirled in my mind. We'd risked everything and now possessed the final piece of evidence. But in 2 days, we'd face Judge Ramirez again. Would he see our actions as heroic or criminal? The weight of that question settled over me like midnight fog. I looked at Grandma, her quilt wrapped around her shoulders like a shield, and realized that tomorrow morning we'd either move one step closer to home or find ourselves on the other side of the law, fighting for a different kind of survival. And in the quiet that followed, I understood that our greatest risk was only just beginning. I woke up before dawn on Monday, the first gray light creeping through the curtains of Grandma's living room. The music box sat on the side table, its brass inlay catching the weak light like a promise. I didn't wind it, didn't want its lullaby echoing in my brain while I was still processing the judge's conditional guardianship order. In my lap lay the original will and codicil, heavy in the manila envelope that felt more like a ticking time bomb than a family heirloom. I traced my finger over Grandpa's signature on the codicil, the narrow slant of his handwriting like the final stitch in a quilt he never got to see finished. 60 days until the estate hearing, 60 days in which Victoria could still maneuver influence or even disappear records entirely. My chest tightened with the risk of it all. Breaking into the county archive wasn't just reckless, it was illegal. But I'd done it for Grandma. I'd done it because love sometimes demands actions that defy the rules. Now the question was whether the court would see me as a hero or as a felon. I folded my jacket around the envelope, the folds crisp and tense, and drove us into the gray Seattle morning, heart pounding like a drum roll before the final act. The courthouse loomed ahead, a monolith of polished stone and reinforced glass. I parked on 4th Avenue, avoiding the metered spots so I wouldn't risk a ticket that might distract me during the hearing. Grandma slumped in the passenger seat, dozing on her quilt as if the whole ordeal was a dream she'd soon wake from. I watched her, feeling the weight of her trust settle over me again. We climbed the steps under the courthouse's soaring columns, the flag overhead snapping in a chill breeze, a symbol of justice that sometimes felt more like an abstraction than a reality. Inside the security line threaded past metal detectors and stern-faced officers. When my grandma's walker beeped, an officer offered a gentle smile and waved her through. I nodded thanks, but my own heart slammed against my ribs. Every step closer to Department 3 brought me face to face with the risk that all this could come crashing down, that the judge might reject the originals as evidence if they were obtained unlawfully. I had to believe in a higher justice, the idea that right, once proven, must prevail even if the path to it was crooked. In Clerk Carlisle's office, I placed the sealed envelope on the counter as if setting a fragile bundle of glass before her. A line of court staff hovered behind glass partitions, filing papers, making phone calls. Carlisle, the clerk who'd processed our emergency guardianship petition, recognized me and offered a small sympathetic nod. She asked to see the clerk-signed chain of custody forms Daniel had drafted. I handed them over my fingertips, brushing hers in a brief human moment amid bureaucratic coldness. "These are under seal," she reminded me, lifting the envelope gingerly as though it were radioactive. I signed the form, received under court seal for Department 3. My pen hovered over the paper longer than I meant. What if someone raised my signature in evidence at a criminal hearing someday? But I sighed, slid the pen back, and rose. Grandma's hand found mine. Her grip was frail, but her eyes shone with relief. As we left the office, I heard the soft click of the seal snapping shut a thin barrier between us and any further tampering. For the moment, we had secured our truth inside the fortress of the court's own record-keeping. Outside, the midday sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the steps in a wash of pale gold, as if the city itself approved our cause. By afternoon, word of our filing had trickled through neighborhood grapevines and social media. The Seattle Times ran a brief sidebar piece, "Local Granddaughter Secures Sealed Estate Documents in Guardianship." Dispute complete with a grainy photo of me holding the music box outside the courthouse. Beneath it, a comment thread blossomed, some praising me as a champion for elder rights, others condemning the methods stealing public records is still a crime. I scrolled past, closing the app and tossing my phone onto the passenger seat. I didn't need viral opinions to remind me of the stakes. Across town, the community board at Grandma's church displayed a flyer for a Justice for Mrs. Sheridan potluck neighbors, promising casseroles and support. Even our neighbors who hadn't spoken on our lawn vigil watched us now with quiet respect. But the praise came with a shadow. One comment threatened legal action. "We'll see if she faces consequences for theft." And I knew that every supportive face carried the same whisper of doubt. Was the public's empathy enough to protect us from the letter of the law? The hearing on the estate distribution arrived like a storm on Thursday. I dressed in the same navy suit, polished shoes, and a crisp white shirt, the uniform of someone who wants to be taken seriously. Grandma wore her lavender shawl. Its color reminded me of the wildflowers Grandpa used to grow in their garden. We entered the courtroom under the watchful portraits of past judges, the air thick with anticipation. Daniel hovered at my side, flipping through his notes with the calm focus of a man about to deliver a symphony. Victoria sat across the aisle, her posture immaculate, but I noticed her eyes flicker more than usual anxiety behind the perfect mask. Judge Ramirez presided with an unreadable expression. When Daniel rose for his closing argument, the courtroom grew hushed. He laid out our case, the codicil naming me as secondary heir, the emergency guardianship order, the sealed originals, and the careful chain of custody. Then, with a deft flourish, he played the recording of Clerk Carlisle's affidavit. Her voice, recorded under oath, explained that she had personally delivered the original will and codicil into my hands at my request and believed Grandma was unduly influenced. The defense attempted to object, accusing us of misrepresentation of facts, but the judge raised his hand and said, "Sustained, letting the affidavit stand." In that moment, I felt the scales of justice tip toward us, the court acknowledging that the path I'd chosen, though unconventional, had been driven by the imperative to protect a vulnerable elder. When Victoria's attorney stood to argue, he attacked our credibility, alleging that the chain of custody forms were backdated and that I'd coerced the clerk into signing under duress. He painted a picture of an overzealous granddaughter willing to manipulate systems for personal gain. My stomach turned. As he spoke, I glanced at Grandma, her hands clenched in her lap, her knuckles white against the quilt. His words were barbed, but I drew a deep breath, reminding myself that my moral imperative was stronger than his legal machinations. Daniel countered, pointing to the vigil video, the neighbor affidavits, and the certified microfilm copies we'd submitted earlier. He concluded, "Yes, Miss Miller took extraordinary steps, but extraordinary circumstances demand extraordinary actions. Mrs. Sheridan's rights were stripped from her under false pretenses. This court has the authority and the duty to restore her autonomy and her legacy." He sat, shoulders squared. The judge leaned forward, scribbled on his notepad, and then called a brief recess to deliberate. The room buzzed, softly, hushed conversations, the scrape of papers. 15 tension-filled minutes later, Judge Ramirez returned. He cleared his throat, eyes sweeping between the two sides. The court has reviewed the evidence, including the sealed originals and the affidavits regarding their release, and finds that Mrs. Sheridan's testamentary intent was compromised by undue influence. The codicil naming Alex Miller as secondary beneficiary is valid. The property and assets of the estate shall be distributed in accordance with the codicil, and permanent guardianship shall remain with Alex Miller. The gavel came down soft yet definitive. A wave of relief crashed through me. Grandma's eyes welled with tears, and I felt her lean into me, frail but triumphant. The courtroom erupted into muted applause. Neighbors stood, voices hushed but joyous. Victoria sat frozen, face pale, her attorney slumping in his seat. In that moment, it felt as though we'd snatched justice from the jaws of indifference. Outside the courthouse, the late afternoon light bathed the city in warm hues. Reporters swarmed us again, cameras flashing. Maria and I stood protectively beside Grandma as I spoke. Thank you to everyone who stood by us. This was never just about property. It was about dignity, truth, and standing up for those who can't always stand for themselves. As we walked down the steps, neighbors waited with hugs and casseroles wrapped in foil. Ethan appeared, tears in his eyes, and pulled us into a group hug. It felt like we'd stitched the family back together, however frayed the edges. Yet even in that sweet moment, I felt the sting of the future's uncertainty. The methods I'd used breaking into archives still hung over me like a specter. Reporters' questions turned to rumors. Will you face charges for unauthorized access to public records? Did you conspire with a clerk to commit a crime? I offered non-committal smiles. The truth was, I didn't know what would happen next. We'd won the estate battle, but the war with the law might just be beginning. That evening, back at Grandma's kitchen table, we gathered around a single candle, a symbol of hope that had guided us through every dark hour. The music box lay between us, its lid open but silent. Grandma reached out and wound it, and the familiar lullaby began its gentle tinkle. She closed her eyes and smiled, her frail shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. I sat beside her, feeling the flicker of candlelight on the signed ruling. The weight in my jacket pocket seemed lighter now, but as I watched the flame dance, I realized justice comes at a price. My phone buzzed on the countertop, an unrecognized number. I glanced at it and saw the message preview. Detective Jameson here. We need to talk. My heart skipped, the lullaby's notes hanging in the air like a question. I looked at Grandma's peaceful face, and then at the candle's wavering flame, wondering what the morning would bring. The fight to protect her had ended for now, but another fight was about to begin. Would the law punish me for my devotion? And if so, what would that mean for Grandma's hard-won peace? The candle sputtered once, then burned steady. I took a deep breath, wrapping the quilt around my shoulders as if it were armor, and prepared for whatever came next.